welcome to the Blood Brothers podcast. We are tonight myself, Sean Coleman, and Mr. Christopher McDonald, and we are joined in our hot seat by Bernadette McDougall, better known to book lovers as B.A. Paris. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on.
It's a pleasure. Now, with to sit in the slightly daunted seat of here we are talking to New York Times bestseller, Sunday Times bestseller, Amazon #1 bestseller. How many sellers have you got?
I don't know. I don't really think about all that. To be honest, I don't really. And I don't know what they all mean. The titles. I mean, lots of people are Sunday Times bestsellers and New York Times bestsellers, so it's not as if it's very original.
Yeah. Although not a lot of people have sold over 1 million copies of their debut, so that is quite special.
Yes, it is. I must admit, I heard the other day that it sold 3.5 million worldwide. So, for somebody who thought that nobody would buy their book, my brother told me when he heard I was going to have a book published, he said, "I can't believe you think somebody's going to buy it and read it." So that's great to have that over him now. I sold 3.5 million.
Well, I mean,
exactly.
It's not the entire world population, but quite a good part of the literate population. I mean, they all kind of liked it. Some people even left a nice review, brother.
Well, he was the one that pointed out to me my first 1-star review on the day it was published. So.
Fantastic. I think you need your siblings to bring you down to earth, don't you? Well, at least that's what they're good at. How did that come about? How did submitting? I mean, is it a big long story, or did you?
Well, not really. I can make it quite short. I started writing when I was 50, and at first I was only writing for myself, and I wasn't writing psychological thrillers. And it was only a few years later that I decided, well, I didn't decide, a friend of mine said you should try and get published. So I started looking at agencies and I started sending off some of the books I'd written. Well, I'd send off a book to about 5 and it would get rejected. So I'd write another book and send it off and it would get rejected. And I remember asking one agency when I always got the same sort of reply, this is not what the market is looking for, but don't give up. So I asked what the market was looking for and they said psychological thrillers. And I said, I will never, ever write a psychological thriller because actually hadn't really thought about genre. I was just writing family dramas. I never thought about what a psychological thriller was. I suppose I thought it was probably something to do with a police procedural novel, which wasn't something I wanted to write. And then I wrote Behind Closed Doors, and I kind of had a feeling that this one might work because it was different to the other ones I'd been sending out. And I sent it off to the 5 agencies that I really, really wanted and had never dared send a book to before. And my top agency, Darley Anderson, picked it up and said, "This is a great psychological thriller." And I said, "Oh, really? I, hadn't thought of it in that way at all." And then
that's what they are.
It was published, and yes, I was very lucky because this book that, I really didn't expect it to sell at all because I don't think any author has faith in what they write, and as soon as it's published, you think you could have done better with that book. So when it suddenly, and actually, to tell you the truth, I had no idea what was happening because I was living in France at the time. I didn't have any social media. I didn't know what the bookseller was. I had no idea what was going on in England with my book. I mean, I did have my publisher and my agent saying, "Oh, it sold 100,000 copies, it sold 200." But for me, those figures actually didn't mean anything. And it was only when my publisher invited me. Yes, that's it. And it was only when my publishers invited me over for a celebration because it had sold 500,000 copies. And I walked in, there was champagne, and I said, "Oh, wait, 500,000 copies good." We still laugh about it now. And, honestly, that was me. I had no idea because I didn't know. I just thought that all authors sold that many books. So,
no.
As I say,
no, absolutely not. Almost 100% not. But that's fantastic. And so then psychological drama is no looking back, right? Psychological thrillers.
Well, more or less. I mean, of course, once I wrote one, I had to write another one to prove that I could carry on. And then I was under contract for another 2, but I really wanted to write The Dilemma, which isn't a psychological thriller, it's a family drama. And because it was getting in the way of anything else I wanted to write, I couldn't think of writing a psychological thriller because I had this book in my head that I wanted to write. And my publishers very kindly said, "Okay, just go ahead and write it." And, I think it was one of those books where a lot of people were expecting to be a psychological thriller. They thought it would be. And so they might have been disappointed. They were probably waiting for the massive twist at the end. And of course, there wasn't one because really it's a family drama. So I'm back writing psychological thrillers because I think on the whole, that is what works for the market at the moment, and that's what people want.
And the two family dramas that you wrote before, have they come back out of the drawer, or?
No, they're still in the drawer, but you never know. One day, when I set up my writing psychological thrillers, and I mean, they're probably really old-fashioned now because, times move on. I think when I wrote one of them, there were hardly mobile phones, or, not to the extent that there are today. So all these things need to be looked at. So it would be kind of dragging it, into the 21st century. And I'd have to, I mean, it was written in the, but just time just moves on so quickly now, technology-wise. So there'd be certain things that wouldn't work in my books. But, they're family dramas. Who knows? One day, maybe.
Yeah, no, I had a fantastic time writing a series set in the 80s simply because I didn't have to worry that somebody could just call somebody on their mobile phone, because you could actually let the crime play out at a different pace, because we were so restricted by technology, and I loved that for a little while. But yeah, and sorry, Chris.
I was just nodding along.
You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to bring us on to The Therapist.
Yes.
Please, can you tell us? Please, can you tell us a little bit?
Waving at the screen.
Yes, of course. So, The Therapist, which is going to be published next week, is it tells the story of Alice and Leo, who move into a gated residence in London. She's a country girl, and she hasn't known Leo that long, probably about 18 months. And they move into this gated residence, and she hasn't been in this house very long before she discovers that something really terrible took place in the house 18 months previously. And she becomes obsessed with trying to find out about the therapist who lived there before, who's called Nina. And she becomes a little bit obsessed by this for several reasons. One, because she wants to know what happened in the house, and she tries to talk to her neighbors about it, and they're all a little bit cagey, and she's wondering if one of them was involved, and so she sets about trying to find out the truth behind what happened. So that is basically the story.
And where does the inspiration come from for that? Is this a story plucked from the ether, or is that, because I get a lot of when you're reading those tiny little snippets in newspapers and in back page, and you go, that'll make a good one, and put it in a notepad for much later down the line and come back and look. But where do yours come from? Usually
they come from a situation I think could happen to me. For my second book, The Breakdown, I was driving through some woods during a storm, and I thought, what would I do if I saw a car that had broken down? Would I stop, or would I carry on? And what would the consequences be? And for The Therapist, we just moved back to the UK a few years ago, and 2 years ago now we moved into this old cottage. And I began to think about the people that might have died in the house before, and I was quite happy living with their ghosts. But then I thought, what if I found out that somebody had been murdered here quite recently? How would I feel about it? And I thought, well, actually, that's a great start for a novel. And then I thought about doing a housewarming because, we didn't know anybody in the village and we wanted to get to know the neighbours. And I thought, what if, after the housewarming, I found that somebody that had come to the housewarming wasn't actually somebody who had been invited, And so I kind of merged those two ideas to give me the start of The Therapist.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you do you actually sit down and you've thought about the scenario, but what's the process after that? Do you map it out? I mean, my question is, do you plot it all out first, or do you see how it goes?
Never. I've tried to plot. I have a lovely author friend who sent me all her spreadsheets so I could see how to do it, because I thought I must be doing something wrong, because I just sit down and start writing, and I just couldn't do it because, it said chapter 1, he says this, she says this, and this happens at the end. And I thought, I don't know. How can I know that until I start writing it? So no, I'm not a plotter. I mean, I think about the story in my head, and I usually know who I think that the baddie will be and what will happen at the very end. But the rest of it, I don't know. And I love that journey because the story changes so much to what I'd originally thought, as I'm writing it. And I love that journey. I just love it.
Yeah.
And how long do you usually give yourself for a first draft? Do you just write on through, or do you write polish? So by the time you get to end of draft 1, you're in a fit start.
I love the editing part. So I write, polish. So I'll write, one day, the next morning I'll read what I wrote the day before, I'll polish it up, then I'll carry on. And, I do that. So my first draft would probably, my next book, I started it, I think, in September, and I've finished it now. So it takes about 6 months. But for me, that is a really good first draft. It's in a good state. I'm hoping that once that goes off to my editors and it comes back, I'm not going to have too much work to do on it. I'm hoping that there might be a little something that I might have to tweak a bit. Mind you, if there's one thing you have to tweak loads of things in the book because, it just is like a chain reaction. But it's usually in a pretty good state.
Yeah.
So I would say
I kind of like that because I think the first book I ever wrote, I wrote straight through. I didn't really have a choice because the publishers wanted it. And they wanted to start publishing it in sections. So they were publishing it in 20,000 word beats along the way, which I hadn't been really aware that I wouldn't be able to go back and change anything in the beginning as it got further down the plotting line. It was being published serialized. It was really a very strange, mad process. But ever since then, I've thought, no, before anybody else reads it, I have to have gone through it a few times. But I still write pretty much all the way through. And then leave big chunks where you go, I've got a note of changes along, like a board of changes, go back and change, father this and that everywhere through. And then come to the end and print it all out and then go through it with red pen and cross everything out and go back and change. And then I think I do that 3 times before anybody else even gets to read it. So. What are you laughing at, Chris? You just send them off. There we go.
Yeah. It just was because I was thinking about psychological thrillers in general. I think because I write sort of like the police procedural kind of thing. I don't plan at all, and I really thought if I was writing a psychological thriller, because there's so many little things dotted through it, and like you say, if you have to change one thing, it interferes with so many. I had it in my head that every psychological thriller knew chapter by chapter, but it's really interesting to know that you just sort of freewheel it. I like that. When I'm thinking about the characters, sorry, you go for it.
No, carry on. Sorry.
I was just going to say your characters. You mentioned like a housewarming, which happens pretty early on in the book. Before you started writing, had you sort of got a character Bible written out, or did you sort of get to know the characters as you went?
Yeah, I think I get to know them as I go along. I hadn't got Leo fully formed in my head. I mean, I knew he was Alice's husband, but I didn't really know anything about his secrets or anything like that. That just came out as I was writing the book. So I don't really have a great idea about my characters. I just like to get to know them, and then they surprise me as well because they often turn out to be stronger than I thought they would, or perhaps sometimes a little bit more stupid than I thought they'd be, or, so I really enjoy this process of getting to know the characters. I don't think I could write a book where I really knew my characters well at the beginning, because as the story develops, they would surely change. That's how I think. But then I do know authors that plot everything out from beginning to end, so that when they actually start writing, they know exactly where their book is going. So, I just think there's 2 different types of authors, really.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I know authors who would sort of sit there and go, the plot is almost demanding that we go in a certain direction, but my character would never do that. And you're like, but they can. You can just go on, off we run. Just ask them nicely, see if they'll bend the rules just once. And I don't know, I know my characters to an extent. Like, as you say, I know who's going to be good and who's going to be bad. And but then even then, when I was writing the code, downtime, somebody just popped out. I thought he was an FBI agent, but it turned out he was the killer who had killed the FBI agent and taken his identity and stepped inside. And you're like, blimey, I'm going to have to go back and bloody change loads of stuff now. And when I look back at it, I didn't have to change. I had to change a couple of sentences because in somewhere that character had already decided who they were going to be. They'd done it really well. So, I love that when you just go, I know the parameters of my characters, but when they turn around and do something very surprising, it's just You're like, yeah. But when you talk to
it's
somebody
great,
who
isn't it?
isn't a writer, like when you go and talk to your partner or whatever, and they go, and then they just turned around and they shot someone, and you're like, what do you mean they just turned around? And surely you're writing those words, aren't you? Like, no, that's not how it works. I can't explain it to you. That's not how it works.
Yeah,
They did it.
it's
I
true.
love
The characters do take over sometimes. I know when I was
Yeah.
writing Behind Closed Doors, I knew that Jack was going to be a really not very nice person. But, sometimes I would read over what I'd written the day before and I think, gosh, where did that come from? And it was like he was saying to me, no, I've got to be worse than this. If I'm going to grip
Yeah.
people's imagination, I've got to be really evil.
I've got to be
And
really
that
bad.
was really, and that was really surprising for me that he would do this.
Yeah, but he was really. I mean, I remember reading it. It wasn't that long after it had come out, and I was reading it as part of book club, and we were all kind of just sitting there going, it's like, obviously nobody knows really what happens with your neighbours and what seems perfect, and that whole MacGuffin of what seems like a perfect relationship from the outside. And I remember at the time I was living next to a couple of people that just seemed to have it all. The sort of the eloquent, polite children, and the nice car and the nice house and the good jobs, and then they're both beautiful and gym bodies and everything else. And you just think, somewhere in there is something that makes them fallible and potentially more so. And I remember us all just sort of sitting around at book club going, bloody hell, he's dark. He's a dark character.
Yeah, he was. He was.
It's fun to write them as well.
Definitely. It's always better to write evil characters, I think.
Oh, I love it.
More fun.
But do you find people sort of give you a bit of side eye? Neighbours especially.
Well, actually, even my family, because I think they'd read a couple of my family dramas, but when I wrote Behind Closed Doors, my older children must have been about 18, 19, 20 at the time, and I think they all read it except the little one, and they were really shocked by the content of the book. They just said, "How did you come up with this thing? Where does and my friends as well? How is your mind so dark?" Because actually, I'm a really happy person and I'm very positive, but. Oh, I don't know what happened. Was that me or was it you?
No, it was you. We were talking and you froze, and then.
I don't know what happened. Yeah, it just completely. But it just said I was disconnected completely. But we do live miles out in the country.
We did have a warning that your internet may be dodgy. In the gap, did you notice when Chris ran out of screen quickly, while we just before your internet faded? Well,
oh yes,
here's a psychological thriller set up for you, because Chris is a school teacher. Tell it what happened, Chris.
Yes.
What happened, Chris?
So I'm a teacher, and I teach like a school across the road, and I heard my wife answer the door but not talk or anything, so I went out just to see what was up, and a girl in my class and two girls that I don't know have sent this letter, but also this meerkat with cable ties on its legs. So
okay, and what was that meant to denote?
I have no idea. The note says, "Thanks for being the best teacher."
Ah, that's good. It's a positive note.
Yeah, positive note, but with cable ties.
Suggest.
Oh, that's all right then. It's a positive note. That's good, because otherwise it'd be really scary.
I was like, well, we definitely need to check which kids from the class the others are, because one of them might be the local drug dealer's kids, and you could just suddenly find yourself holding a meerkat full of cocaine that you won't wear off. Cable ties are there to handcuff you when the cops come. Well, we can record it all if it happens, and that'll be fun.
Yeah, you might have to take this bit out of the podcast.
So, and we were talking about your neighbours and family and all of the darkness that people sort of see in your mind. I remember my mum reading my first book and just going, "Is all of that in your head? Is that all that darkness in your head?" And I was like, "No, it's all on the page. I'm quite happy. I'm fine." And I think we've had this conversation a number of times that a lot of not necessarily crime writers, but people who write about crime or the darker side of humanity or the darker side of life, or the things people do to each other, we're all quite cheery when you meet us, and people are surprised that such darkness can come from within. But and then when you meet, a number of other writers who are sort of doing literary fiction or romance or whatever, you're just like, wow, why are you so angry? Come on now, you write nice things. Everybody's happy in your book. I think there's a tonic in writing the darker side of people and getting that out. But definitely,
Yeah, we get it all onto the page.
yeah, I know my partner just sits there going, what is wrong with your mind? What is going on in there? And don't worry, it's fine. It's all fine.
Do you let your
I won't
family
do that
read
to you.
your stuff before it goes out, or do they come later?
No, my daughters usually read it. I usually have 2 out of or 3 out of 5 that will read it. Whoever's got the time, really, because I do value their feedback. I really do, and they'll point out if there's something that they don't like, or if they're not really sure, don't know what it means. So that's quite good. I really like. But actually, my 6th one, I'm going to send it out with anybody having read it, because I just want to get it out now in front of my editors. I'm quite excited about this one. I really like it, but I'm just hoping they will as well.
Yeah.
And have you worked with the same editors throughout? The same?
No, I mean, for my first 3 books, I worked with a different editor in the UK. Well, actually, and in the US as well. So recently, a couple of years ago, for book 4, I changed editors, both in the US and in the UK. So I'm working with different editors now.
Because it's such a funny personal relationship, isn't it? I remember when the editor of my first 2 moved from that publisher, and I found out I wasn't going to have her working on the 3rd book. I was like, even though that was a new series and they were unrelated and everything else, I was a bit like, oh no, what am I going to do?
It is always quite difficult because you don't know who you're going to get in the place, But luckily, I really like my editors, and they're very good, and I've got a wonderful agent. My agent's brilliant, so she's really my first reader. I'll always run it by my agent before I run it by my editors, because she's got a great eye for things as well.
Yeah.
It is essential, isn't it, to find an agent that knows story and is able to, without any compunction, say to you, maybe have a think about this, or work here, or I didn't get that. It's just sort of finding that, because I think people also think writing's a really lonely business, and to an extent it is, but getting it out into the public, I think, is a bit more of a team effort sometimes, and that people don't understand as much when they're not part of the process. When you submitted your debut, were you aware that you would then be on a long line of edits and rewrites and reformation?
No, I didn't really understand how the process worked, but actually there wasn't much rewriting for Behind Closed Doors. There was just there were a couple of tweaks, but that was it. So that was absolutely fine. I mean, it didn't really hit me then. I think it was for a book that I submitted as my book 4, which, again, it was set in the 80s, funnily enough, and they wanted me to move it into the 21st century, and it just couldn't work. Yeah. And I just thought of all the work that would entail, and I just thought, I can't do it. And I think that's when you realise that, I realised that the story I had written for the 80s just could not be transferred, 40 years later. It just didn't work at all. So that was, just thinking of the edits too, for that I just couldn't get my head around them, which is why in the end I wrote The Dilemma, because I just thought that book has to just never be published, or just to stay, just to stay in a drawer somewhere, or just be looked at later on when books in the 80s are maybe fashionable, which they're not.
I was going to say, isn't that an interesting thing that you can... that you could actually make a far more sinister psychological thriller out of the fact that it's a historical... So because of the even attitudes within relationships, or attitudes at home, or attitudes towards women, attitudes towards the role of men, everything in the 80s was slightly dumb. That's what I was really enjoying about writing the series I did, because it was set in Soho, and it was a predominantly gay cast, and it was the only place I could set it where you could almost recreate that sort of noirish 1920s environment where the police were actively attacking the community, and the police were the most corrupt part of those things, and all of the laws that were being imposed were oppressing everybody. And it's one of those things that you can't put anywhere else. If we set it now, people would be just like, who cares? So he's trans, who cares? And there's no drama, like you wouldn't, and you just can't move it. And I think there's something lovely about just had a little thrill when you went, historical psychological thriller. Even though the 80s shouldn't really count historical, but
40 years ago. When you said 40 years ago, that's madness.
Yeah,
it is.
I know. It is 40 years
Yeah.
ago, but it's so much simpler to write books then, I think. It's just hard now. You always have to make your characters lose their mobile phone or break their laptop or something, because otherwise it just doesn't work.
Be in a dead zone.
Exactly.
I mean, I think I was editing yours, Chris, and it was yours. And I said, mobile phones do work abroad. You could just call him. You were like, wait till he gets back from tour. You're like, he's only in Germany, friend. The phone will work. You're like, oh, bugger.
Yeah, how can I change this?
I'll change the way I phrase it. It is just annoying, isn't it? There's that constant connection.
Yeah. Please can I ask about the understudy, because that's, I mean, Sean said writing is a lonely business sometimes, but how was it teaming up with other people to write a novel?
Yeah, it was great fun. It was a really different process, and I really respected the writers I was with. I mean, I was delighted to be able to join Sophie Hannah. It was her brainchild, and to know that I was going to be writing with her and Claire McIntosh, was brilliant.
Yeah.
But then again, I found it quite hard in some ways because we had an initial meetings over a weekend where we thrashed out the story. But then when it came to writing our own characters, it's quite hard because, people would go off tangent a bit, me included maybe, or you'd find you were repeating so we were writing simultaneously. So it meant that something that I might have mentioned in my chapter, somebody would have already mentioned in the chapter before. There was quite a lot of repetition. And because Holly lived abroad, we only had meetings like this over Zoom to kind of thrash out the problem. So it was quite, quite hard, I think. It wasn't, I think it would be easier if the writers all lived next to each other and met once a week and, but it wasn't that kind of thing. So yeah, it was quite, there's things that you learn from it as well. And you think, I found writing simultaneously as quite difficult because you didn't know what the other writers, I mean, you knew more or less, there were the outlines of what they were going to put in their chapters. But of course, there was a lot of overlapping, which meant a lot of editing. So, it's a very different process than writing on your own.
Yeah, it feels like one of the things that you should do, but could do, all staying together in a sort of retreat. And writing in the same room back to back, but just all there going. Have you talked? And I think it's interesting. We have a couple of writers on the Red Dog books, Neil Richards and Matthew Costello, who've written together for probably the last 30 years now. They've written games, Xbox and PlayStation kind of games, and loads of books. And they write cozy mysteries together, and I think they're on 35, 40 odd books that they've written together. And so Matt lives in the States and Neil lives in the UK. So they take advantage of that full 24-hour cycle, and they get together a couple of times a year, COVID notwithstanding, and they plot like the next 6 books or however many. And they plot them sort of within certain detail. This is the story, this is who's good, who's bad. And then they each write a chapter, each review each other's last chapter, and then write the next chapter, and then review the last chapter and write. And so they write on, and then they both rewrite, and and by the end of it, it's difficult to tell whose voice is whose, even for both of them. And I think that's also a really nice process, where you kind of read what the last person's done, edit all of that, and then write on.
Yeah,
knowing
I think that's probably... Yeah, I think it's probably easier to do that, but there's time constraints. And I think we were probably all writing our next standalones as well. So, but yeah, I think that was where, for me, the main problem was with us writing our chapters simultaneously, the first 4, and then writing the next 4, But as I say, in an ideal world, you just do it. One would write a chapter and everybody would read it, comment, and then the next person would write the next chapter. But, it's a lot of time to be able to do that.
The ideal world doesn't challenge you that much, does it?
No, exactly.
And with the therapist, and I don't think I'm giving anything away, and if I am, we can take this out, but there are chapters where there's little glimpses of the past, and it's written... Was that... So we've talked about how you just go along with it, but did you have to think hard about where they went, or did it sort of come naturally to you as you were going?
When I decided that I would put those in, I had to think about it and how many there would be, and I didn't want there to be too many. And it was a kind of a balanced thing. So yes, I think there's one it's every quarter really, more or less.
Yeah.
So it just was where I thought that it needed that break. I mean, at the beginning, I hadn't done those chapters, but I thought actually it just needs that little something else, that little insight into the therapist, whoever they are. And I think that was it. And that was it. I wanted people to think about who is this speaking, because we don't know until the end. We all have we can think it's this one or this one or this one, or something completely unknown, and so I thought that added something into it. But yes, I decided to put forward, and I think that was enough.
Yeah, I think it works really well. This is sort of off tangent a little bit, but did any of you see the Guardian article about how to write a novel, or good novel writing tips, that came out, I think, yesterday or the day before?
I saw somebody had linked to it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah.
I might have read it, but I've probably forgotten what it said because I can't actually remember anything. Isn't that awful? Because I think I did see it, but anyway, was there something amazing in it?
To be honest, there was some quite good advice, but it was written in this sort of like highbrow language. But one of the things that, because people talk a lot about the first line, and the first line has to sort of, make an impact. But in here it said, I'm just going to read it because I thought this deserves to be said. The person said, a first line should open up your rib cage. It should reach in and twist your heart backwards. It should suggest that the world will never be the same again. Now, do you put thought into your first lines like that, or do you do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree. It's a big ask. It's a big ask in one sentence. So I would say that your first paragraph has to be really grip the reader, because I think one line is quite difficult to do that. I mean, yes, if you can do that, it's absolutely brilliant. But I don't know a lot of books where one line, I think you just need to read a bit more. But I would say if you haven't caught your reader's attention in the first paragraph, I mean, I am very aware that you have to write that opening kind of paragraph that will grip your reader's attention.
But there's also a really fine line, isn't there, between there's so many books you pick up and go, wow, you really worked on every syllable of that first line. I can feel you. I can feel you. Calm down. If the rest of it's like this, I'm out.
You can tell sometimes when they're overworked a bit,
Yeah, and there are some greats, and and quite often those sort of translate into movie opening lines as well, where you just say, "Yep, okay, I'm in, I'm hooked," whatever it is. What were your big writing inspirations before you started?
Probably. I mean, I never set out to write novels, in fact. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I always thought I'd write children's stories. And when I say children's stories, I mean for about 5 to 10-year-olds. I never, ever intended to write a novel. And my daughters knew that I wanted to write. And, my daughter said to me once, because there was a competition in the Sunday Times, why don't you write a novel? And I said, oh, no, I'm just going to write children's stories. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe I could write a novel. So I hadn't intended that to write. But I think my inspiration, and why actually I am writing psychological thrillers, which I never thought I'd write, I think my inspiration was to be in Agatha Christie. Because when I was young, I just loved her books. I mean, I started the classic way, with Enid Blyton, and then got onto Agatha Christie. And I just loved the books. I remember reading them, being absolutely amazed that I couldn't guess who the killer was. I was always surprised at the end. And I just thought, somebody to have that power to create this story, and I don't know, and I'm always thinking it's this person, it's that. And I think, I must have been inspired by her, definitely.
Yeah, but it's such a, it's amazing to be carried by the mind of somebody who can thread you along and make you think you know what's happening, and make you think you've got a handle on all of these things. And yet when they twist it and tell you who the murderer is, you go, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But I didn't see it, and that's a huge skill, because most people don't manage to pull that off with the same aplomb.
Yeah.
So I love that.
It's really hard. I think as psychological thriller writers, it's really hard now to kind of not trick your readers, but to lead them astray a bit. It's quite hard, because they've read so many and they know, and they always say, yeah, I know who it is. But that's what I really love. One of my daughters is reading The Therapist at the moment. She's already told me who it is, and she's very sure, and I just love it because it's not that at all. And I just don't say anything. And she goes, it is that, isn't it?
It is that. Oh, how did you guess? Did I let that out? I do love that. I love it, but I also, you hate I can't be in the same room as somebody reading my book. Like, so if I've got family members or whatever reading it, I have to leave because I can't. Every time they sort of go, oh, or
Yeah.
and you're like, what? There's nothing funny in that. What are you laughing at? What are you? Why are you laughing? But when people know you really well, they can hear bits of your own voice in there, or things that have been said, or a reference to something that only you lot know about. But you just say, why are you laughing? There's nothing funny in this book. Stop it. I just become a nervous wreck. And I think even when I know that people I know are reading it, even if I'm not near them, I don't like that.
No.
Which is ridiculous because you do write to be read, right? But
but not by your friends. I find that quite hard, actually. I find it. My book, The Therapist, came out in France about a month ago, so all my French friends there, have read it, and I just, and they can be. They're very good. They're very supportive and they love it. But they can say, oh, I didn't like this, if they read The Dilemma or Bring Me Back, I didn't like it as much as your other ones. They will actually say things like that. And, it's, and in a way, I'm very aware of their critical eye and, they're quite forthright. So I always cringe a bit when I know that, they're reading it.
Yeah.
And so that's already out in France. It's out here April the 15th, right? So just over a week's time. We're hoping, I think, as of today's announcements, we should be back to bookshops being open from next Monday. So, in theory, bookshops open before launch.
Yes, so hopefully, I'll walk into Waterstones or Smiths and see my book there. But, I don't know because there might be a delay in shipment. But yes, it's great news for everybody that the bookstores are opening again. I think that's been really hard. I have to admit, in France, they left the bookshops open. They do consider it as a necessity to be able to go and buy books. So even in their lockdown, bookshops are open.
Oh, that's so beautifully French because I think the UK left alcohol open, so liquor. We don't have separate liquor stores, but I know all my family in South Africa. Suddenly, in the first lockdown, we're figuring out how to make pineapple beer because liquor stores are a separate thing and they weren't deemed essential. People were like, they are bloody essential if we're going to spend this much time with our family. But to go, bookshop's essential, and the UK is like, no, we don't need that. I don't know. So what have you got planned for the launch?
Nothing actually, because we didn't know if anything was going to be open. So I'm not even actually doing any. Normally, I live near Farnham, so I usually go into Waterstones and do a little launch there on the day. But I haven't organised anything because I'm not sure whether they'll. The bookstore's open on. Is it the Monday? And then my book comes out on the Thursday. So for the moment, I haven't done anything. And I'll probably just be raising a glass of champagne here. I'd be in London, maybe having lunch with my publisher, my agent, but that's not going to happen this year. So
no.
We can't eat, unless we were outside. So I'm sure we'll do something later on in the summer, which is absolutely fine. I really only did a proper launch, I think, to Bring Me Back. And I really wanted to have a launch because I hadn't had one. For my other books, and actually it's very stressful a launch, and at the end of the day I think I just prefer to celebrate with family and friends, fine, just my family.
So Chris, for the first in your series we managed to launch.
Yeah.
The second came out mid-lockdown in November, and the third's coming out next week. Well, yeah,
Tuesday.
in 2 weeks' time. Tuesday.
Okay.
Right. So the day after bookshops open.
Yes.
but again, we may be able to have a pint in a beer garden near us to celebrate.
Try and flog some books there.
But actually, that feels like the most triumphant launch that we could have right now. It feels like a proper triumph. Just going, let's meet in a beer garden for a pint.
Yes.
Because it's been so long, and it's just something that we've sort of hankered after for a while.
Yeah.
I love it.
I cannot wait. It's going to be good.
But yeah, launches are bloody stressful anyway.
Yeah. Having to read in front of people is the worst.
Stand up and talk. Are
they
you
ask me to do
comfortable
that
with?
sometimes when I'm
Sorry, my internet's
I
playing havoc.
was going to say, are you comfortable with reading in front of people, or are you?
It's okay, but I've never been asked to do that here. Funnily enough, I've been asked to do it abroad, and I'm reading in English to people that probably don't speak English. So I'm always wondering why, obviously some of them can understand it, but usually then there's somebody who will translate or then read it in the language after, and I find
Yeah.
that quite, because if they can't understand, there's not really any feedback. You don't get anybody saying laughing or going, so you're just reading to kind of, and I'm just thinking if anybody
sort of
understand. Yeah, so it's funny. So, I mean, it depends
remember-
how long that's gone for.
I remember going to the Frankfurt Book Fair when the code came out, and they'd released the audiobook at exactly the same time, and I had no, you forget that different cultures do things differently, and in Germany, everything is dubbed for one, and then the audiobooks were really big, but they used a lot of the dubbing actors to read the audiobook, so they were like, "You'll never guess who we've got to read your book," and I'm like, "You're right. I will not ever guess this because it's the German version and it's unlikely." And it was the guy who voices Daniel Craig in all of the James Bonds. So they were all like off their tree excited about it. And he came to the launch and read. So I didn't have to read at the launch there. He read from the German version, and it was all great. And they were like, "Oh, all of an excitement." But to me, he sounded just like Kiefer Sutherland and looked like Kiefer Sutherland. So all I could see was Jack Bauer reading my book.
Well, that's awesome.
It was so weird. It was just such a surreal experience. But all I was grateful was that I didn't have to read it in German or in English to a crowd of angry hackers at the Frankfurt Book Fair. I hate it. I can't do it. I had to read recently at the South Bank, and absolutely, I remember called Chris and said, "I'm sorry I made you read it at your launch."
Yeah,
I don't like it.
The revenge.
Don't like it. Yeah.
Good.
At this stage, we usually play a game. Would you like to play a game? That sounded very like Saw.
I'm not very good at games. I'm really not good at games, but go on then. We can always cut this out if I can't them.
It's not.
It's not a quiz. It's not a quiz.
It's 50-50, so you're fine. What we do is we find a review that was 1 star, and we don't read it to you, but we find out what else that person reviewed to get a glimpse into their life. So I found 2 items that someone reviewed your book, also reviewed these, and all you have to do is tell me whether they give it 5 stars or 1 star.
So what you get? Sorry, can you just explain that again?
So basically, somebody's given your book 1 star, but they've also reviewed other things, and we have to guess whether the other things they've reviewed they loved or hated based on the fact they gave your book 1 star.
Okay. Right, okay. So this is the 1-star review you're reading. Okay.
But not.
So we're not going to read that your 1 star.
No, I'm going to
just the person who's done it.
So the first item is a 1 line a day, 5-year memory book.
And which book did they give a 1-star review to?
The Dilemma.
The Dilemma. Okay. So they gave a 1-star review. But now they've got a 1 line a day memory
5-year memory book, so like a 5-year diary. So yeah, 5 star, 1 star.
I think 1 star.
Oh, I see. I get yes, I get the game now. Okay, I see what you mean. That was for the Dilemma, right? Okay.
But this is the new item. So did that person give this 5-year diary a 1 star or a 5 star?
A 5 star, definitely a 5 star. A 5
okay, 5 stars. Sean, you're saying 1 star.
I've split. I've said 1 star.
They gave it 5 stars, so you get one point. They
yeah, there we are then.
They said it was good quality. Not the only one of its kind on the market, but one of the lower costing ones. The quality was good. Interesting to see how it lasts over 5 years. And then, even though it's a 5-star review, they say pages are quite thin, and the smaller size of the book means that writing on the left-hand page is more difficult due to the binding. So they're not entirely satisfied, but they still give it 5 stars.
Well, they must have really hated the Dilemma then.
I was going to say, if they're that picky about something they've given 5 stars to.
Yeah.
What else did they
The
review?
second review is of noise isolating in-ear headphones.
Right.
So 1 star or 5 star?
1 star. I'm
I
sticking
think
1
this
star.
was, yeah, me too, 1 star.
Okay. Yes, 1 star. Rubbish. They were fine at first, not particularly noise cancelling, but the sound was good. Now they are broken and the volume just goes all the way up to full, down to mute, and all the way up to full again, which is really annoying. Don't bother buying them. Well done.
They are a happy person.
Yeah, our guest wins. It usually doesn't happen, but well done.
Great. I didn't even understand the game at the beginning, so I'm really happy that I won that. Great.
Well
Brilliant.
done. Your trophy's in the post. And at this stage, we usually ask, what are you reading?
What am I reading at the moment? I'm not, because I've been in a rush to finish my book. So I have a big TBR pile, like I suppose everybody does, and I'm going to be tackling that in the next couple of weeks. I haven't read, what did I read? I read recently Phoebe Morgan's book because I'm on a panel with her. So I read that, which is very good. I really enjoyed that. Other than that, I haven't really read anything for the last month or so. But if you want a recommendation for a good book, I'm very happy to recommend We Begin at the End by Chris Whittaker, because I love that book. And I read it just at the end of last year around Christmas time. And, that is my go-to book. And if anybody says, what's a good book? What can I read? I always say that one.
Yeah, he won our inaugural Blood Brothers Book of the Year award, so he has actually got a trophy. And he's a lovely man.
He actually got an actual trophy.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's a brilliant book.
Sean, what about you?
I'm reading. I've just started Falling that we got this week, which is T.J. Newman. It's just gonna be. When you open something and think I haven't got time to read this. Oh, I'm already 17 pages in.
Yeah.
All I meant to do was pick it up and take it upstairs, and then you're like, no, I've got to stop. I've got to wrap everything. I've got to do everything else. So yeah, I'm taking that up with me when I finish. So I've just started, but I'm excited.
Awesome.
What about you, Chris?
The Dare by Leslie Cara. She's coming on the show in a few weeks.
That'd be really good.
Yeah, and similar to Sean, where it was my lie-in. Morning we take it in turns, me and my wife, to get up with the kids, and it was my lie-in. And it was by my bed, and I thought, I'll read one chapter, and then before I knew it, I was 70 pages in, so I'm deep into it. It's really good.
Before you knew it, it was lunchtime, and it was your turn.
To surface.
Yeah. So do you both enjoy reading psychological thrillers? Because actually, although I do enjoy them, they're not my choice of book if I'm reading for myself.
I do, but I need to sort of palate cleanse between them because, as you say, you start sort of trying to over predict things, and you start thinking, "Oh, I've read this," or I do. But because I run the publishing company as well, I get a lot of submissions, so you can cleanse your palate in many ways doing that.
Yeah,
but we've had some absolutely stunning submissions in the last there's sort of 3 in the last week that you can't stop reading. Can't stop reading.
Brilliant.
I'm similar,
which is brilliant.
Yeah, I always think that where I read one and I love it, and then I don't go back to one for ages and then wonder why I haven't, and then do the same. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the Therapist, and I'm really enjoying The Dare. So yeah, you've reignited it in me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, thank you very much for your time. When this goes out, it'll be a week until yours comes out, and everyone should go grab it. It's really, really great. And thank you to your publicist for sending
this one. It is fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
And thank you for it's still such an honor for us to get books in the post. We set up a little podcast to chat to other writers during the first lockdown about a year ago, and you're episode 52. We're a year and a week in, and
I think it's great what you do, though, because it's really nice. I listened to some of the podcasts, over the last few days. And it's really interesting to hear what the other writers have to say and everything. It's really, really enjoyable, and to see the different perspectives and how everybody works differently and their experiences.
Yeah, and I think what I've loved about it as a process is just that you kind of go, we're all doing the same thing, whether we're on our 50th book or our second or our first. Everybody's. Yeah, we were talking to Anne Cleves, and she said, no, it doesn't get any different. And when the next book comes out, you're still as nervous that everybody's going to hate it and nobody wants to publish it. And the same thing it infests us all, I guess, because we've put heart and soul into creating something out of nothing. But
yeah. That's really interesting. I've always wondered about that, whether authors, other authors are really confident when their books come out and think, yeah, this is a great book. Yeah. Because whenever mine come out, I just think, oh gosh, it's that kind of cringing thing, because I think everybody's going to be reading it now, and I never would read my book once it's been published because there's much I'd want to change in it and just think, oh my God, this is awful. Why did I write that? And why couldn't I do this?
You can't go back to them once they've been out, I don't think. But I think there's not a single author that we've interviewed, some of them on their, as I say, 20th, 30th book, and some on their first and second. There's not a single one we've interviewed that said, no, just knock them out. I'm fine with that. Everybody feels exactly the same thing, which makes you feel like you're part of the club. I love it.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed speaking to you both. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you for sharing your hour with us and telling us all about where it's all come from and where it's going. And best of luck. Not that you need it, but I hope the therapy flies like it should, because it's just so hard to get those things right, and I think you really did. So,
thank you. That's really kind of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Bye bye then.
Bye then.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.